Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, let's take a step back from opening half and look back into the info slide. The info slide, in verbatim, stated that countries like Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE want to join BRICS. Moreover, 36 other countries want to apply to be members. Now let's take a moment to think about that. 36 countries want to apply to this organization. To conceive that this just because of Russian or Chinese influence is an absurd and frankly insulting thing to say to these sovereign states. What this debate has been so far has failed to tackle the two basic and most important burdens of this motion. Number one, why developing countries are going to be better on either side of the house. And number two, which side proves to be far less of an oppressive force to these developing states. Those two simple burdens is where closing opposition will come in and win this debate. I will structure my speech in 4 ways. First, I'll rebut side government. Then, I'll prove why BRICS is good for these nations. Then, I'll prove why Russia and China are not going to be as an oppressive force as side government may think. And lastly, I'll do some quick way. What are my rebuttals to the side of opening and closing government? Number one, opening government argues the importance of autonomy and how individual developing nations will get the short end of the stick since there may be abuses coming in from Russia and China who are a part of BRICS. We will tell you 3 responses to that case. First, the purpose of BRICS is primarily to open the doors for trade and investment. They aren't here to assert their forms of government on these developing nations. The developing nations will still have their own local government and domestic economy like that. Number 2, even if these countries were malevolent, and we recognize that there are controversial geopolitical issues such as Russian involvement in the Ukraine war and Chinese territorial disputes across Asia, BRICS as a conglomerate and collective body in and of itself serves as a checks and balance to be able to hold these countries more accountable for their failure overseas. It is because China and Russia is part of BRICS that we can call them out, involve international media and report these things to the International Criminal Court, Amnesty International, and other international bodies and organizations to bring the spotlight to their shortcomings. BRICS as a collective institution serves as a check and balance to the developing nations joining, since now they have the collective bargaining power as a group to hold these larger companies accountable. More on that in my second extension. And third, no one is forced to join BRICS. You may opt out, you may opt in. Developing countries are given a choice. This debate is about why it is in the interest of these developing nations to pursue that choice. And lastly, to just deal with closing government. We agree that closing opposition, that this debate isn't about having to choose a side, but setting up developing nations for success in the future. However, closing government told us that countries will take advantage of weaker countries economically. But we have to understand that the nature of business outsourcing isn't really bad. Even if these countries become hubs for production because of a more favorable currency and cheaper labor, this allows jobs to thrive in these developing nations, and they now become hubs for business. This looks like Europe outsourcing BPOs or call centers in India and the Philippines because of a high literacy rate and good English speakers. Those provide a lot of money of their GDP and make these markets lucrative. That's why the world is so keen on hiring Indian and Filipino developers precisely because they are a competitive market. The nature of capitalism and business in that is a win-win. What are my extensions? 2 extensions. Extension number 1. Why we should support the growing influence of BRICS in developing nations and why it is in the interest of those nations. A lot of what we got from opening was a shopping list of benefits and harms. OG asserts the harms of countries like China and Russia. OO asserts the decline of the US and their economic and geopolitical failings. We tell you that regardless of the outcome, it is the interest of developing nations if we have a growing interest in BRICS. Note panel that this is an outcome that's independent, extension, and CO wins on all of these paradigms. Why is it the interest for developing nations if BRICS grows in influence? First, regardless of business or economic cycle, whether or not the economy is strong or weak, whether or not we have inflation or deflation, economic prosperity is good. BRICS countries are very rich and the economic prosperity will trickle down to the developing countries that join them. This looks like opening up your country to new and emerging markets, a potential increase in things like foreign direct investment, trade partners, export markets, all that stuff. These economic incentives trump a lot of the political risks we get from OG simply because as a conglomerate, BRICS wants to do business. the point in which toxic geopolitics ruins trade deals and perpetuates conflict, member states can start opting out of agreements, voting against the oppressor and using their collective bargaining power to sway votes the other way. Second, in a post-COVID world, given all the rampant worldwide inflation and overall weakness of all currencies, not just the US dollar, are facing in this new normal, we do recognize that in order for our world to be ready for whatever uncertainty the future holds, peace and prosperity are at the utmost priority given the already globalized world we are in. Economic ties and reliance over time create multilateral economic and political reliance between nations that make them less likely to go into war in the future. That's why Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, who are all large oil and petroleum manufacturers, are less likely to go to conflict with each other because of the interdependence that comes as a consequence of them being trade partners. BRICS solidifies and protects these partnerships and developing nations because of these protected nations. And very quickly, since I don't have a lot of time, extension number 2, why BRICS serves as a countervailing force in order to keep the collective of individual states in check. Because what we got from opening government was essentially a value-neutral case, right? Everything that they said about Russia being bad because of Ukraine and China being bad because of territorial disputes happened on the US as well through stuff like Honduras, Cuba, all that Latin American and South American countries are as a consequence because of US, and that's value-neutral. But that was already said by opening opposition, which we do admit. So how do we outweigh that? We outweigh that by telling you that we are going to bite the bullet. So assuming that their impact only exists on our side, what is our response? The biggest problem with the US is that they're the only global superpower that exists right now. They are the giant that holds the world at bay. And as of right now, the world is failing because of that. That is precisely why BRICS stands as the better alternative. Because a conglomerate of nation states like Russia, like China, even India, because let's not forget, India is also formidable force here too, have the implicit check and balance to get their things together and not to fall off the deep end because of the various economic agreements that they have agreed to, that they've signed up on, which all of that occurs as a reason for the collective. So why do we win? We win because we win, or we prove to you the best level as to why these developing countries will actually have the interest of opting in BRICS, and why Russia and China are just not going to be that much of a harm on these states. With that being said, proud to oppose.